Kola Adebayo had it all. He was a billionaire by the age of 35, a self-made man known for his sharp business acumen and unrivaled wealth. His days were filled with luxury, his nights with high-profile events and glamorous women. The world seemed to revolve around him, with beautiful women constantly vying for his attention, most of them after his money, his status, or both. Before we dive into this unforgettable tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Luxury Tales by SK family. Subscribe now, and let's begin this incredible journey together. To Kola, they were all the same. Exquisitely dressed, perfectly made up, but shallow. He had long stopped being impressed by external beauty. Despite the offers from models, actresses, and socialites, Kola turned them down one by one. He had become disillusioned with the world of superficiality, where people only saw him for his wealth. The women who pursued him seemed more interested in his assets than in him as a person. Love? He had almost forgotten what that felt like. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for: her. When Oluwaseun, the new maid, walked into his mansion, she was everything Kola was not used to. There was no heavy makeup, no designer clothing, no pretenses, just a soft-spoken, humble woman who walked with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. At first, Kola paid little attention. She was just another part of the household, a maid among many. But as the days went by, something about her struck him. She wasn't like the others. There was an undeniable authenticity in her that Kola had been searching for. She was different, and for the first time in years, Kola felt a strange pull, an attraction he couldn't ignore. Oluwaseun was not just another face in the crowd. She was a person who made him feel something real, something deeper than he had ever felt before. At first, Kola tried to ignore the feelings that had begun to stir within him. After all, Oluwaseun was just a maid, nothing more. His world was built on connections with the elite, the beautiful, the powerful. It wasn't practical to entertain thoughts of someone like her. Yet, every time he saw her, something inexplicable tugged at him. He found himself drawn to the way she moved quietly through the house, always working diligently, never complaining, never seeking attention. It was a stark contrast to the women he had grown used to, women who would flaunt their beauty and demand the best of everything. Kola's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. He'd been raised to believe that the woman who captured his heart should match his world, refined, sophisticated, and driven by status. But Oluwaseun was none of those things. She was grounded, humble, and carried herself with an effortless dignity that Kola couldn't quite put his finger on. There was something magnetic about her simplicity, something that made him question the relationships he'd had in the past, the ones that had been fueled by shallow desires. He began to watch her more closely, and in doing so, he realized that Oluwaseun wasn't like the women he'd spent years with. The other women had never really listened to him, at least not in the way she did. He had spent entire nights with models and celebrities, but none of them had ever genuinely cared about his thoughts, his fears, or his dreams. Oluwaseun, however, seemed to listen intently. She didn't interrupt him, nor did she ever seem to rush him. Every conversation with her was filled with curiosity and respect, qualities that were increasingly rare in his world. There was another thing that gnawed at him. Oluwaseun never asked for anything. Unlike the other women who constantly wanted gifts, trips, or special privileges, she was content with the simple things. One evening, he offered her a luxurious gift, an expensive necklace he had purchased during one of his international business trips, but she turned it down politely, explaining that she didn't need material possessions to feel valued. She told him that her life had been built on love, respect, and honesty, qualities that were far more precious than anything money could buy. That night, Kola found himself tossing and turning in his bed, questioning everything he knew about relationships. Kola's friends began to notice the change in him. He had stopped attending social gatherings as frequently, his usual entourage of glamorous women was nowhere to be seen, and he seemed distracted, lost in thought. "What's up with you, Kola?" one of his closest friends asked. "You're acting different. Did you meet someone new?" Kola didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. There was no logic to it. Oluwaseun was not the kind of woman he was supposed to fall for. She was a maid. She didn't fit his world. Yet every time he saw her, the attraction only grew stronger. The simplicity in her smile, the warmth in her eyes, everything about her felt genuine and unpretentious. One afternoon, he caught himself staring at her as she quietly cleaned the living room. What's going on? Kola thought. Why am I feeling this way about her? She's just a maid. But he couldn't shake the feeling. It wasn't the physical attraction that was drawing him in. It was something far deeper, far more dangerous. Oluwaseun had touched something within him that he had long buried, his longing for something real. Something that wasn't fake, something that wasn't bought. The mystery of her character had become the dopamine hit Kola hadn't known he'd been missing for so long. For the first time in years, he felt truly intrigued, not by her outward appearance, but by the mystery of her inner world. And that, Kola realized, was more compelling than anything he had ever experienced before. Kola Adebayo's growing feelings for Oluwaseun began to spiral into an undeniable internal conflict. He couldn't help but notice how every moment spent with her seemed to unravel a piece of himself he had carefully tucked away. He was no stranger to controlling his emotions, but Oluwaseun had broken through his defenses in a way no one had ever managed before. The more he observed her, the more Kola became convinced that this was something far deeper than simple infatuation. Oluwaseun didn't flatter him with her eyes or make him feel powerful with her words the way many women did. Instead, she had this strange ability to make him feel human again. She didn't want his wealth or his status. She was just, well, herself. It wasn't just that she was unlike the women he had previously dated. It was the quiet wisdom in her eyes. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of someone who had lived a life full of struggle and resilience. It was in her conversations about life, her simple yet profound views on family, and how she held her head high despite her humble beginnings. Kola realized that he had never truly understood the kind of strength it took to live as she did. The women he had known all his life, privileged, wealthy, and beautiful, couldn't match Oluwaseun's integrity, her unwavering self-worth. But this growing admiration came with consequences. Kola's mind raced with doubt. What would his friends think? What would his family say? His father, a successful businessman in his own right, had always expected him to marry someone of his caliber, someone who could elevate the family name, someone who could fit seamlessly into the world of luxury and influence that Kola had come to inhabit. Oluwaseun, on the other hand, came from a completely different world. She didn't belong to that elite circle. She wasn't the kind of woman who would fit into the grand ballrooms, the charity galas, or the high society events Kola attended. His friends weren't making it any easier either. Every time Kola mentioned Oluwaseun, they laughed. "You're kidding, right?" one of them said when he made the mistake of mentioning her name during a dinner party. "She's just a maid, Kola. You could have anyone. Why settle for her?" The mocking words echoed in his head. Could he really go through with this? Could he marry someone who wasn't a part of his world? The societal pressure, the expectations of his family and peers, these were things Kola had never had to contend with before. He had always gotten what he wanted, and people had always accepted his choices. But this was different. Oluwaseun wasn't just someone he could casually pursue and then move on from. She represented everything Kola had long avoided: vulnerability, honesty, and a genuine connection that went far beyond wealth. There were moments of doubt, moments when Kola thought about pulling back. What if she was just a passing infatuation? What if his attraction to her was just the result of boredom, of being surrounded by the same type of women for so long? But then he'd catch a glimpse of Oluwaseun, her gentle smile, the way she spoke so kindly to the staff, the way she helped a child in the street without hesitation, and Kola would know deep down that this wasn't just a phase. The tension within Kola began to grow. He wanted Oluwaseun, but at the same time he feared that pursuing her would mean betraying the very world he had spent so long building, a world built on luxury, appearance, and status. Could he leave all of that behind for something so uncertain, so different? And the most troubling thought of all, what if Oluwaseun didn't feel the same way? What if she, knowing the difference in their worlds, was too proud to accept his feelings? Kola felt trapped. He had come so far in his life, Yet now it seemed like the one thing he wanted most, Oluwaseun, was the one thing he couldn't have without breaking every rule he had ever lived by. It was late one evening when Kola finally decided to confront his feelings. He had spent weeks circling the same thoughts, questioning himself, and battling his emotions. The tension had become unbearable, and he knew he couldn't keep living with this uncertainty. He had to know, for better or worse, if there was anything real between him and Oluwaseun. He found her in the garden, watering the flowers. The soft glow of the setting sun made her look almost ethereal, her features bathed in a gentle light. For a moment, Kola just stood there, watching her, silently debating whether this was the right moment, the right time to ask the question that had been plaguing him. His heart raced as he approached her, and he couldn't help but notice how peaceful she seemed, so at ease, so comfortable in her own skin. There was no rush in her movements, no anxiety in her eyes, just a calm sense of purpose that made her even more captivating. Oluwaseun, the woman who had unknowingly unsettled his world. As Kola reached her, she looked up, a soft smile spreading across her face. "Good evening, sir," she said quietly, her voice soothing yet unsure. Kola took a deep breath, feeling his nerves kick in, but this time he didn't want to hesitate. He had to say it. He had to find out if she felt the same way. "Oluwaseun," Kola said, his voice sounding more raw than he intended. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." She looked at him, the smile slowly fading as she sensed the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, sir?" The question was simple, yet profound. He had avoided it for so long, too afraid to face the truth, but now, in that moment, he couldn't escape it. Do you ever see me as more than just your employer?" Kola's words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. He swallowed hard, watching her face for any sign of surprise or judgment. His heart thudded in his chest, louder now, as though it was trying to escape. Oluwaseun took a step back, her eyes flicking to the ground, almost as if she was searching for the right words. The silence between them stretched out, thick with tension. Kola's stomach twisted with anxiety, wondering if he had made a mistake. "I don't want you to say anything you feel you need to," he added quickly, his voice growing softer. "I just need to know if I'm imagining things." She stood there, frozen for a moment, her gaze distant. Kola held his breath, waiting for a response, but Oluwaseun remained silent for a long while. Then, slowly, she looked up at him. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Kola saw something that he hadn't expected: vulnerability. Oluwaseun wasn't the self-assured, composed woman he had always thought her to be. There was a quiet fear in her eyes, an emotion she had hidden well until now. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never allowed myself to think like that. You're my employer, and I'm just the maid. There's too much between us, too much I can't change." Kola felt a pang of disappointment, but also a strange sense of relief. For the first time she had spoken her truth, unfiltered and raw. But there was also something in her words that Kola didn't expect, a depth that resonated with him. She was afraid, not of him, but of the very same things he had feared, the societal differences, the gap between them. But her honesty opened a door he hadn't even considered. Kola realized in that moment that Oluwaseun wasn't rejecting him. She was rejecting the world that he represented, the world that would never accept her. Kola took a step closer, his voice gentle. "You don't have to change anything about who you are. I don't want you to be someone else." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He hadn't meant to speak so candidly, but something in him, something deeper than logic, had broken through. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about connection, about understanding, trust, and vulnerability. Oluwaseun wasn't like the women he had been with before. She didn't need to impress him or play games. She was just real. She shook her head slightly, her eyes tearing up. "But I don't belong in your world. You deserve someone who can fit into your life, into your expectations, not me." Kola felt a lump form in his throat, his heart swelling with emotion. "You don't have to fit into anything. Just be yourself. That's all I need from you." The silence between them thickened once again, but this time it was different. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a moment of truth, one that Kola had long avoided. And for the first time in months, Kola Adebayo felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. This wasn't just about choosing her over anyone else. It was about choosing something real, something beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond appearance. It was about love, raw and unfiltered, and he was ready for it. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity. Kola had poured his heart out to Oluwaseun, and while he didn't have the answer he expected, he knew one thing for certain. This was no passing phase. He couldn't just walk away. His feelings for her were real, undeniable, and it was clear that Oluwaseun had been affected by their conversation as well. The weight of her hesitation lingered in the air, but so did something else, a new sense of possibility. Kola knew that there was a battle ahead, one he couldn't win alone. Oluwaseun had her doubts, not just about their relationship, but about how the world would perceive them. The difference in their lives seemed insurmountable, and though he had told her that she didn't need to change, he understood that the pressures of society, family, and expectations weighed heavily on her. Still, Kola was resolute. He couldn't let this feeling slip through his fingers. Oluwaseun was the first person in his life to make him question everything. She was different from the shallow world he had built his empire in. She had given him something money couldn't buy, authenticity, and he realized now that nothing mattered more than that. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't going to let her walk away, not when he had finally found something real. The next day he called her to his study. His mind was made up. When she entered the room, she looked as apprehensive as she had been that afternoon in the garden. She stood at the threshold, waiting for him to speak, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Kola walked over to her, a soft determination in his eyes. "Oluwaseun," he began, his voice calm and steady, "I know you're afraid, but I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust us. I want you in my life, in whatever capacity that means for us. I don't care about the difference in our worlds. I care about you." Her eyes filled with uncertainty, but there was something softer in her gaze now, a spark of hope buried beneath the layers of doubt. "But Kola," she whispered, "I'm just a maid. I don't know how I can fit into your life. You have everything, and I have nothing." Kola shook his head gently, a quiet smile playing on his lips. "You're wrong," he said. "You have something far more valuable than anything I could ever give you. You have a heart that is pure, and that's all I need." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time Oluwaseun didn't pull away. Instead, she stood still, her breath shallow, as if processing the weight of his words. Kola reached out, gently taking her hand. "I've spent my entire life accumulating wealth, but it's never given me the one thing I truly wanted, someone to love, and someone who would love me for who I really am. You don't need to be someone else, Oluwaseun. You don't need to prove anything. Just be with me, as you are. That's enough." Tears welled up in Oluwaseun's eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself to release them. The wall she had built around herself seemed to melt, and she stepped closer to him. "You mean it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kola nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I do." For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of their breath and the quiet of the room. Then Oluwaseun smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Kola felt a weight lift from his chest, and in that moment he knew that things were changing. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something deeper, something far more meaningful than the world he had known. "I'm scared, Kola," she admitted, her voice shaky, "but maybe we can try." Her words were tentative, but they held a promise, one of hope, of a future neither of them had anticipated. Kola squeezed her hand gently. "We don't need to have all the answers right now. We just need to take the first step together." And for the first time in months, Kola felt at peace. Oluwaseun wasn't just the maid anymore. She was the woman who had shown him that love wasn't about luxury or status. It was about honesty, connection, and the willingness to build something real despite the odds. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, but in that moment, the resolution was clear. Kola Adebayo had found something far more precious than any amount of money. He had found a love that was worth fighting for, and with Oluwaseun by his side, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As weeks passed, Kola and Oluwaseun began to carve out a quiet yet profound life together. They faced the stares, the whispers, and the subtle and sometimes overt disapproval from the people around them. Kola's business associates, who had once respected him for his savvy in the corporate world, now seemed to look at him with a mix of confusion and derision. His friends, those who had once been his closest confidants, couldn't understand why he'd thrown away his reputation for a woman who had no social standing. Even his father, the powerful patriarch of the family, had privately asked him why he had to make such an unwise decision. But Kola had never been more sure of anything in his life. He didn't need their approval. But Oluwaseun, though she had begun to soften and open her heart to Kola, struggled with the changes that came with their relationship. The lavish events, the never-ending attention, the intrusion into every part of her private life, it wasn't the world she was used to. And despite Kola's reassurances, she felt like an outsider in his world. The gap between their two lives wasn't just about wealth or status, it was the difference in their perspectives on life. Kola had been raised with privilege and luxury, while she had grown up in the struggle of survival. One evening, after a particularly heated conversation about their future, Oluwaseun disappeared. She didn't leave a note. She didn't pack her things. She simply vanished, and Kola's heart dropped into his stomach as soon as he realized she was gone. Panic set in. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He called her family, friends, anyone who might know where she was, but no one had seen her. Kola tried to remain calm, but the worry gnawed at him, and the anxiety twisted inside him like a knot. This wasn't the woman who had been content with his love. This wasn't the woman who had agreed to try. By the next morning, Kola felt a sense of impending doom. She was gone, and he couldn't help but feel responsible. Had he pushed too hard? Had he overwhelmed her with his world? Was it his wealth, his status, that had ultimately driven her away? Then the call came. It wasn't Oluwaseun's voice on the other end, but her brother, who told Kola that Oluwaseun had gone back to her childhood home, a small village in the outskirts of Lagos. She needed space, he said. She needed to find herself again, away from the pressures of her new life. Kola was devastated, but he understood. Oluwaseun had always been true to herself, and perhaps she had realized that she needed to return to her roots to make sense of everything that had happened. She wasn't rejecting him. She was simply taking the time she needed to reconcile her inner conflict, to understand if she truly belonged in this new world or if she was meant to stay where she came from. Kola immediately flew to Lagos, his heart heavy with both fear and determination. He needed to see her. He needed to explain that his love for her had never been about her fitting into his life, but about her being exactly who she was. It had always been her spirit that had captivated him, not the world she lived in. When Kola arrived at the small village, he found Oluwaseun standing at the edge of a quiet river, her back to him. She was alone, as if waiting for something, waiting for him, maybe. Her face was turned towards the water, her eyes distant and full of thought. "Oluwaseun," he called gently, stepping towards her. She didn't turn around right away, but after a long pause, she slowly did. Her eyes were soft, but there was a sadness there, a depth of understanding he hadn't seen before. "Kola," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you, I always have, but I need to find my place in this world, our world, before I can truly be with you." Kola stepped forward and reached out, his hand brushing hers. "You don't have to choose, Oluwaseun. I'm not asking you to fit into a world that isn't yours. I just want you. I want us." But Oluwaseun shook her head slowly. "I wish I could be everything you need, Kola, but sometimes love isn't enough. We both need to grow in different ways." For the first time, Kola saw the full weight of her decision. She wasn't choosing to walk away from him. She was choosing to walk away from a life that was too foreign, too big, and too overwhelming for her to fully embrace. It wasn't a rejection. It was a realization that sometimes love, despite its intensity, couldn't overcome the complexities of life. Kola stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart torn. He had spent so long trying to make things work in his own image, believing that love alone could solve their problems. But now he understood. Oluwaseun had been right all along. They needed space, they needed time, and they needed to figure out who they were apart from each other before they could truly build a life together. As she turned and began to walk away, Kola realized something that would change him forever. Sometimes, the best love stories weren't the ones that ended in the fairy tale wedding or the happily ever after. Sometimes, love was about knowing when to let go, if only for a moment, so that both people could grow into who they were meant to be. And as he stood there watching her walk away, Kola knew that this wasn't the end of their story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter, one where the love they shared would never fade, but would have to be nurtured from afar. Weeks passed after that fateful day by the river, and Kola's life gradually returned to its usual rhythm. But the lessons he had learned from Oluwaseun lingered with him, changing him in ways he never expected. He had thought that wealth, status, and influence were the keys to happiness, but Oluwaseun had shown him otherwise. Kola had spent his life in pursuit of more money, more power, more recognition. But Oluwaseun had taught him that true fulfillment didn't lie in these things. She had reminded him that authenticity, vulnerability, and love were the real treasures. And even though they were no longer together, he was forever grateful for the time they had shared. Oluwaseun's decision to step away had been a painful one, but Kola understood it. She hadn't rejected him. She had chosen to honor herself, to find her own path. In a way, her choice had been the most selfless act of love she could have given him. She didn't want to be a shadow in his world. She wanted to be her own person. And Kola respected that. Their paths may have diverged, but Kola would never forget the way she had made him feel, alive, seen, and understood. He had learned that love wasn't about fitting into a mold or meeting expectations. It was about being true to oneself, no matter how difficult that might be. And with that lesson, Kola began to see the world around him differently. He began to search for more than just power or success. He searched for meaning, for purpose, for the kind of connection that Oluwaseun had given him, one that went beyond the surface and dug deep into the soul. In the end, Kola understood that sometimes love wasn't about forever. It was about the profound impact someone could have on your life, no matter how short that time might be. Oluwaseun had changed him for the better, and for that he would always be thankful.